Madam President, have you ever gone out to eat at a restaurant with a group of people, but your order was cheaper than everyone else's? Maybe you weren't as hungry, or the restaurant the group picked was more expensive than you could afford, so you were selective about what you ordered. Then when the check comes, someone suggested the group split it evenly. Now, what's your immediate reaction? You're upset, of course, because you ordered the salad, not the filet mignon, or you drank water, not the expensive bottle of wine. You ordered what you wanted, and they ordered what they wanted. You shouldn't be on the hook for their cost. Sadly, Madam President, this illustration is far too real, as last month Joe Biden announced that he would cancel billions of dollars in student loans. Now, let's be clear. He isn't canceling student debt. No, he's transferring that debt to every American taxpayer. Now, a construction worker in Florida is having to foot the bill for the loans of a Harvard grad, which they voluntarily accepted for an education they received. So here's what Democrats are trying to say to that construction worker. You didn't go to college? Democrats don't care. You'll pay the debt of lawyers and doctors, and you'll pay for those who want PhDs in poetry. Talk about poetic injustice. You went to community college or a state school and worked to graduate debt-free. Tough luck. Joe Biden wants you to pay for the advanced degrees of the privileged few. Your tax dollars are now the money pot for other people's student debt. Of course, Joe Biden's plan doesn't even begin to address the real reason of rising higher education costs. That is universities' decades-long practice of unnecessarily raising tuition. As governor of Florida, I addressed that problem and challenged our universities to keep education affordable. Look at the University of Florida. Undergraduate tuition and fees for this academic year are less than $6,500, and it's the 5th best public university in the country. You'll get a fantastic education there. Meanwhile, at Harvard, tuition fees for the academic year cost more than $57,000. There are ways to make education affordable, but Democrats and elites aren't interested in those solutions. That's why Joe Biden is engaging in this reckless move, even though he doesn't solve the real issue and even though he lacks the proper constitutional authority. Everybody knows this. That's why in July of this year, Nancy Pelosi herself denied the president had such power. When asked, she said, quote, "The president can't do it. That's not even a discussion." Yet now the Department of Justice is engaging in interpretive gymnastics to co-opt legislation that was passed to help our service members in the aftermath of 9/11. It's a desperate attempt to stretch a good law well beyond its intent so Joe Biden can give handouts to his liberal voters in Harvard pals. Biden wants to spend money that Congress has not appropriated for loan forgiveness that Congress has not authorized. It's illegal, it's unconstitutional, it's a gross abuse of authority, and I won't stand for it. Congress must assert its authority here. We have the power of the purse, not the president. That's why I've introduced the Debt Cancelization Accountability Act. My bill would require the Department of Education to get an express appropriation from Congress before they can propose waiving, discharging, or reducing student loan debts to 2 or more borrowers in an amount greater than $1 million. If we want to transfer the debt of some and make everyone pay for it, then Congress has to make that decision. We should simply put it up for a vote. Of course, Democrats in the Senate won't do that. Surely they could have passed a bill by now if they really wanted to, but they wanted Biden to do it alone. So it's easy to see why. In just the past few weeks, we've seen families across the country speak out against Biden's unfair and disastrous proposal. I'm hearing from Floridians every day, and I know my colleagues are too. I'd like to thank Senators Barrasso, Lummis, and Braun for supporting my Debt Cancellation Accountability Act and for choosing to stand with me against Biden's overreach. So let's pass this bill today to reverse Joe Biden's unlawful decision and force Congress to decide this issue. Now, before I ask for unanimous consent, I'd like to turn to my colleague, Senator Braun, from the great state of Indiana.
Thank you, Senator Scott. Mr. President.
Senator from Indiana.
President Biden's student loan debt transfer does not cancel or forgive anything. These debts will still be paid. It's not like they go away. What else does it say about the whole idea that when you take on an obligation and you agree to it, that you can just shirk it or get rid of it? There are many people across the country that would want to be in on that gambit as well. He has simply shifted the costs of repayment onto everyone, including the 65% of American workers who chose not to get a college degree. What about the aspiring plumber or electrician that borrowed $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 for his or her own business? There'd be no end to it. We should focus on getting more value out of colleges rather than giving them another reason to hike prices. Sadly, the only place that's been focused on is in my own home state, where Mitch Daniels, ex-governor of Indiana, froze tuition into 10 years. That's getting more value out, and that's why their enrollment has gone way up. With a national debt of nearly $31 trillion, we can't continue to pile on more debt. When Senator Scott and I got here just a little over 3.5 years ago, we were $18 trillion in debt. We throw trillions around now like we used to, hundreds of billions, and it's on the backs of our kids and grandkids every time we do it. Today, federal student aid owns $1.6 trillion in outstanding federal assets. In other words, student loans. The loan program needs to be completely redone so that colleges are motivated to lower costs. This is an excuse to do the opposite. Finally, President Biden's actions are illegal in the first place. The president doesn't have the authority to cancel all this debt. And I'm hoping it gets taken to court, because what does it say again for future generations? Anyone that makes a commitment to take on debt and to shirk it with the stroke of a pen. Even Speaker Pelosi agreed on this point, saying she didn't think it was legal. Doesn't make any difference in this day and age, you plow forward. This is why I support the Debt Cancellation Accountability Act, which requires the Department of Education to get express appropriation from Congress to pay for any federal student loans the department proposes to waive, discharge, or reduce. I yield the floor back to Senator Scott.
Mr. President.
The Senator from Florida.
I'm so thankful for Senator Braun's support for this bill and for all the work he's done to raise awareness about Biden's reckless spending agenda and to stand for fiscal sanity. As if in legislative session, I ask unanimous consent that the Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions be discharged from further consideration of Senate 4483 and the Senate proceed to its immediate consideration, further that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there objection?
Mr. President.
The Senator from Massachusetts.
Mr. President, reserving the right to object. This is a shameful attempt by Republicans to keep working Americans buried under mountains of student debt. President Biden's decision to cancel up to $20,000 of federal student debt for as many as 43 million Americans with incomes under $125,000 a year is an historic step to deliver life-changing relief to working families and to help rebuild America's middle class. Senator Scott's bill is just one of Republicans' desperate efforts to block cancellation for millions of Americans. Now, Republicans are happy to pass out tax breaks and regulatory loopholes for billionaires and giant corporations, but they're fighting tooth and nail to keep working families from getting a penny of relief. Evidently, Senator Scott believes that $2 trillion in Republican tax cuts that were not paid for is fine, so long as those tax cuts are aimed mostly at billionaires, millionaires, and giant corporations. But a program that costs a fraction as much and for which 90% of its benefits go to people earning less than $75,000 a year is now somehow a moral outrage. Today, he claims to worry about those taxpayers who he says will shoulder student loan cancellation. But where was Senator Scott, or then Governor Scott, when Donald Trump and the congressional Republicans handed out $2 trillion in tax breaks to billionaires and giant corporations, not a penny of which were paid for. Where was he then? Well, he endorsed the Trump administration's plan to cut taxes for corporations, and he celebrated those tax breaks for the richest among us. He wasn't worried about how taxpayers would pay that off, not a word about the fairness for all the people who would bear that burden, so long as the benefits went mostly to the rich and the powerful. Senator Scott has basically laid it all out there for America to see, and that's the difference: helping billionaires or helping working families. And that difference pretty much sums up Republican and Democratic differences across the board. If we're cutting a break for the rich and the powerful, Republicans are on board. If we're trying to help out working people, congressional Republicans take to their fainting couches and claim to be so worried about the national debt. Student loan cancellation is very popular in America, including with the majority of people who have no student loan debt. And that is because there is scarcely a working person anywhere in America today who does not know someone who is choking on student loan debt. But Republicans, evidently the Republicans in Congress, live in bubbles that prevent them from meeting any of the millions of people out there who busted their tails, who worked multiple jobs, who made their payments, and who still watch their debt loads continue to climb. So let me just set the record straight here. I want to repeat an earlier point. Nearly 90% of relief dollars from President Biden's cancellation will go to Americans earning less than $75,000 a year, and none of the help goes to people making more than $125,000 a year. Now, actually, those numbers shouldn't be shocking. Think about who owes student loan debt. Senator Scott talks about Harvard multiple times in his speech, but it's not wealthy people who go to Ivy League schools who end up with the student loan debt. It's middle and working class Americans who were born into families who couldn't afford to pay out of pocket. In fact, 99.7% of borrowers did not attend an Ivy League school. By comparison, at the University of Florida, so that would mean what, 0.3% of people who went to Ivy League schools borrowed money. By comparison, I just looked it up while the senator was speaking, at the University of Florida, 15% have to borrow in order to make it through to graduation. At Florida State, 26%, that's 1 in every 4 people at Florida State, has to take out money in order to be in college. And at Florida A&M, the numbers are even higher. 68%, more than 2/3 of the people who are in school have to take out money in order to make it through college. And this is true across the country. At state schools, about half of all students have to borrow to make it through. At historically black colleges and universities, the number is about 90%. So let's be really clear about who exactly congressional Republicans are trying to take relief away from. It's not Ivy Leaguer doctors and lawyers. Who are the people that Senate Republicans say aren't worthy of the kind of help that billionaires and giant corporations could get in their big tax package? Who do Senate Republicans think should be squeezed harder? Who do Senate Republicans say should simply be left behind? Well, Senate Republicans want to leave behind the 42% of borrowers who do not even have a 4-year college diploma. These are folks who took out money, loans, in order to become a nurse's aide, to become a mechanic, to go to beauty school, to get their commercial driver's license, to drive a truck. And too often, the wages that they were promised never materialized. Senate Republicans say, let them struggle, leave them behind. So who gets the most help under President Biden's cancellation? Senator Scott said this is all about doctors and lawyers. Let's take a look at that. The share of student loan borrowers who earned a cosmetology certificate is about double the share of borrowers who got professional degrees in law and medicine combined. Senate Republican says, let those cosmetology certificate holders struggle, leave them behind. Similarly, there are more student loan borrowers who took out debt to earn a certificate for driving trucks and working on the railroad than those who did so to become dentists and optometrists. Senate Republicans say, let those truck drivers and railroad workers struggle, leave them behind. And it's not just people who have two-year degrees or certificates who get help under President Biden's cancellation. It's people who don't have any degree at all. These are people who did everything our country asked them to do by graduating from high school and advancing their education. But life happened. They got pregnant, or they had to take care of a sick family member, and they had to leave before finishing their degree. Senate Republicans say, let them struggle, leave them behind. Who gets help? It's women who hold nearly 2/3 of all outstanding student loan debt. Black women in particular shoulder a disproportionate amount of the student loan debt burden. Black women who hold more debt than any other group. Senate Republicans say, let them struggle, leave them behind. Who gets help? It's Black Americans who borrow more money to go to college, borrow more money in college, and have a harder time paying it off after college. They are the ones who will see their debt eliminated under President Biden's cancellation plan. Senate Republicans say, let them struggle, leave them behind. Who gets help? It's the 50% of Latino borrowers with debt who will see their student loan debt completely eliminated. Senate Republicans say, let them struggle, leave them behind. Who gets help? It's the millions of people who couldn't save for retirement or buy their first home or start a family because of student debt. Senate Republicans say, let them struggle, leave them behind. We are living in a moment when the President of the United States has reached out, literally, to tens of millions of families and said, I'm putting government on your side. But the congressional Republicans are determined to make this country work even better for the rich and the powerful. And that is why they are trying to pass the bill that Senator Scott has advanced. These Republicans are all for giving handouts to giant corporations and billionaires. But the minute that our country creates a little breathing room for the millions of hardworking people whose biggest sin is they tried to get an education and they grew up in a family that just couldn't afford to pay for it, those Senate Republicans are right here on the Senate floor trying to undo it. So I want to take a minute and just look at the bigger picture to see how we got here. We have a student debt crisis because our government stopped investing in higher education and began shifting the cost of college onto working families. I went to a great public university that cost $50 a semester, a price I could pay for on a part-time waitressing job. I got to become a teacher and a law professor, a United States senator, because higher education opened 1 million doors for a kid like me. But that opportunity no longer exists in America. Today, college costs thousands, even tens of thousands of dollars. And instead of investing taxpayer dollars to help bring down those costs, the state governments reduced their financial support, and the federal government told everyone to borrow the money they needed to cover the rising costs of going to school. And that has left millions of Americans drowning in student loan debt. What's worse, families have had to navigate a broken student loan system riddled with bad actors who are trying to take advantage of and profit off keeping them in debt. During the Trump years, Betsy DeVos, the Secretary of Education, threw in with the for-profit schools. And when students who had been cheated asked for some help, she turned her back. I have long pushed for more accountability and more oversight to bring down the cost of college and to make higher education and training programs more accessible. I have a plan for that. In fact, I have more than one plan for that, and I welcome any Republican to join me in helping make any of these options reality. But cancellation is the first step to fixing a broken student loan system and to delivering relief to families that have been trapped in it for far too long. One final point. The president's plan to cancel student debt will make a huge difference for tens of millions of Americans in their day-to-day lives. But it will do so much more. Debt cancellation is about strengthening our whole economy. Better educated workers make us a wealthier nation and one with more opportunity, not just for those at the top, but more opportunity for everyone. Just consider one example. Following World War II, a grateful nation said to returning GIs that taxpayers would pick up the cost of college and technical training. More than 2 million veterans went to college or graduate school, and nearly 6 million used this opportunity to pursue vocational training to become construction workers, electricians, mechanics, and other careers. Together, these men, and they were nearly all men, built America's middle class. Taxpayer investments in post-high school education meant that millions of people were better educated, and they helped fuel an economic boom that lasted for decades and lifted this entire nation. And it was a bargain. Every dollar that was spent on educating our veterans generated $7 to taxpayers. And that is not even accounting for the significant boost to productivity from a more educated population. Just think about that. A 7-to-1 payoff for investing in higher education for all our people. As President Biden saw something that he could do to help tens of millions of Americans struggling under the weight of student debt and invest in the future of our economy. So he did it. Debt cancellation was the right thing to do. And that is why the majority of Americans, with or without loans, support cancellation. I'm celebrating because cancellation will provide life-changing relief for working families across this country. And that is why I object to the Senate Republicans' shameless attempt to deny people the relief they need. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President.
Senator from Indiana.
So the plan that the Democrats are going to give you, not only on this, was put out clearly in President Biden's blueprint for our country to put us $45 trillion in debt in 10 years, where we'll be paying as much on interest as we do on discretionary spending domestically or the military budget. That is no business plan. And how do you think they're going to pay for the debt forgiveness? They're going to borrow the money to do it, to backfill, to pay the people that are owed the money. One other point of clarification. When you had a practical bill, the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, which was done before Senator Scott and I got here, it was a plan to grow economic activity, a way to pay for it. And had COVID not come along, the CBO was ready to say that it was paying for itself because we were growing the economy at 3%, and the $150 billion per year over 10 years, which is chump change now compared to the $3 trillion the Democrats have put us in debt over the last year and a half, was growing the economy with zero inflation, raising wages in the toughest spots. For those wage earners, we've always tried to do it without borrowing it from our kids and our grandkids. I yield back to the floor to Senator Scott.
Mr. President.
The senator from Florida.
So let's remember what we're talking about here. We're not canceling debt. We're transferring debt. We're transferring the debt because this obligation doesn't go away. Somebody still owes this money. So what we're saying is people that decided, they made the choice to go to college or go to some higher education, they don't want to pay, they're not going to have to pay their debt, and people that didn't already paid off their debt, they're going to pay for it. My colleague from Massachusetts never acknowledged the example. We all remember when we went out to dinner and we didn't spend the most money, and how somebody suggested that, oh, let's just share it, and so we pay for the expensive wine and we pay for the expensive meal. That's not fair. When you talk to Americans around the country and they say, would you like to forgive all the debt? Absolutely, free's great. But when you say you're going to pay for it, they say absolutely not. Why would I pay off the debt for somebody else? And let's remember just what my bill does. It doesn't say we can't forgive student loans. It says that Congress ought to decide if we do it. This is going to cost up to $1 trillion. Now, I don't think we ought to so-called transfer this debt, but my bill will at least give us the chance to have a debate on it. But that's not what my colleague wants to do. I hope my colleague understands that her objection is absolutely a slap in the face to all those workers in Massachusetts and around the country that didn't go to college. Construction workers, small business owners, chefs, flight attendants, firefighters, landscapers, and so many other groups of people have made the decision not to pursue a higher education for whatever reason. And there are many others who worked hard to get scholarships, or those who worked part-time to afford college, or plenty others that took the time to pay off their loans. I'm going to stand with those people, working class people, people who are responsible, hardworking Americans who absolutely are willing to pay off their obligations. I think about people like my dad. My dad had a 6th grade education. He was a truck driver. He worked his tail off. I can't imagine what he would think about working hard every day, then being forced to pay for some other person's degree as a doctor or lawyer. He'd be beside himself. It'd be so unfair. It's not how the real world works. It's a Democrat fantasy land that Joe Biden is trying to turn into reality. People used to take pride in paying off their debts and working hard to see their commitments come through. Democrats want to destroy that and destroy ideas of fiscal responsibility. They want to forget that we're $30 trillion in debt. They want to forget that we still have record high inflation as a result of wasteful spending. And since my colleague wants to pretend that we're in this fantasy land because objecting to my bill is an endorsement of Biden's reckless plan and his unconstitutional debt transfer from the overeducated Harvard grads to the working class. As members of Congress, we should be interested in checks and balances and the separation of powers. We should guard the powers the Constitution especially reserves for the legislative branch. Spending $1 trillion with no congressional oversight is wrong. That's not exactly how our Constitution was set up. This shameless decision to block my bill is just another example of how far Senate Democrats will go to appease the radical left. I yield the floor.
President?
The senator from Massachusetts.
So, Mr. President, I'm still waiting for an answer to the question, where were these Republicans who were talking about fiscal responsibility and what's fair in terms of transferring costs when it was the billionaires and the giant corporations who were getting a $2 trillion tax break? And let us remember because I was here when that happened. Even the conservative economists and think tanks were saying this is going to go on the debt balance because it is not paid for. No, at that moment, they were willing to say, but it's going to produce all kinds of wonderful benefits, which of course did not come to pass. But what about the example I gave? The example about the investment that we made as a country in our returning veterans. The fact that we invested so 2 million of them could get college diplomas, so that millions more could get technical degrees. What about the fact that the numbers show American taxpayers got a return on that investment of 7 to 1? This really is about who we invest in. It seems that what Senator Scott is saying is people shouldn't go to school. If you're in a family that you can't guarantee that you're going to have some assets to back you up, if you ever have to think about the fact that you might get sick, you might fall down, you might get hurt, and you might not be able to finish, or you might not be able to turn that degree into a high-paying job, or you might graduate at a moment when the economy is in a slump, what Senator Scott seems to be saying is, don't order off that menu. Don't go to school. Don't try to get a post-high school certificate in cosmetology. Don't try to get a certificate for truck driving school. Don't try to get a 2-year diploma. Don't try to get a 4-year diploma. That is not going to make America a better or richer country. That is not going to be an America that's going to open opportunities. And the next time Senator Scott or any other Republican talks to me about fair, explain to me what is, I would ask them to explain to me, what is fair that the daughter of a janitor a half a century ago could go to a good 4-year college on $50 a semester. Why? Because American taxpayers invested in those public colleges and universities. And today, that opportunity is not there for a single one of our kids. When you want to talk about who has college debt, instead of talking about the 0.3% of Ivy League grads who have college debt, look at the 68% of Florida A&M grads who have college debt. That is shameful. We need to be an America that's about creating more opportunities, not closing them off for tens of millions of people. I yield the floor.
Mr. President. Mr. President. Mr. President.
The senator from Florida.
So first off, my colleague never addressed the issue that this is a transfer of obligation. I mean, you can have a conversation about, what we should have done with regard to tax cuts in the past, but this is a transfer of obligation. This is a transfer of obligations that people that decided to go to school, and we should do everything we can to help people. But we're not addressing the problem here. I addressed it when I was governor. When I became governor in January of 2011, tuition in Florida was going up 15% a year plus inflation. I stopped it. We didn't see tuition increase while I was governor. And we became the #1 higher education system in the country, according to U.S. News and World Report. We solved the problem of the cost of higher education to make sure people could afford education. We did it because we invested, we kept tuition low, and we paid our universities based on 3 things. Do you get a degree, how much money you make, and what's it cost to get a degree? So guess what? All of our universities became more efficient and more accountable. That's how you fix the problem. This does not fix the problem. This is nothing to reduce tuition. This is nothing to hold our universities accountable. This is nothing to stop our universities from raising tuition.
Mr.
This does
President.
nothing to require our universities to make sure our kids get a job. This has nothing to do to make sure our universities make sure our kids get good paying jobs.
Mr. President.
So I'm very disappointed in my colleague that she would still not address the issue that this is complete transfer of obligation from some people that decided to go get a higher education to people that decided not to. I yield the floor.
Mr. President, I would like to ask if the senator would yield for a question.
Will the senator yield for a question?
I yield the floor.
So I want to ask the senator if
I recognize
you
her.
did. I want to ask the senator if he believes that the 68% of students at Florida A&M University that have student loan debt should never have gone to college, because it turns out their families couldn't afford to pay for college in Florida. Should they just never have tried?
Are you finished? Good. Mr. President.
The senator from Florida.
Absolutely. I did everything I could to make sure all of our students had the opportunity to go to school. We made sure that they could afford to go to school. And so I think we ought to, what I've said in my bill today is this ought to be done by Congress. And let's don't just do some blanket issue, transfer of obligations here. Congress should be doing this. This is going to cost us up to $1 trillion. And we're going to have people like my dad, if he was still alive, a truck driver with a 6th grade education, pay for some Ivy League kid to go to school, and that is wrong.
Mr. President, can I ask for a clarification of that answer?
Senator from Massachusetts.
So among the 68% of Florida A&M students who have student loan debt, I believe I heard the senator say he made it possible for them to afford college. And I'm wondering if he can explain how they could have afforded college without taking on federal student loan debt.
Mr. President.
The senator from Florida.
Well, I'm not suggesting you shouldn't borrow money. But what I'm suggesting is if you do borrow money, you made that decision, all right? You shouldn't transfer it to somebody like my dad, who had a 6th grade education, couldn't afford to go to school, didn't go to school. There shouldn't be a transfer to make sure they pay off your debt. That's a decision you made. You should pay it off. Now, if you have an issue because you can't pay it, let's deal with that issue. That's not what this does. This is whatever your issue is. Joe Biden says by himself, without any act of Congress, he gets to make a decision by himself. Poof, your debt goes away, somebody else picks it up. That's not right.
The senator from Vermont.
I am really delighted that my colleague from Florida is suddenly concerned about transfers of wealth. I really am. Because as he may or may not know, over the last 30 years, there has been a massive transfer of wealth. Problem is, it has gone in the wrong direction. We're talking about the shrinking of the middle class. We're talking about trillions of dollars going to the top 1%. And we are ending up in a situation today where you have billionaires, you have large corporations that don't pay a nickel in federal taxes. And I always find it interesting that whenever Congress does something, ever so rarely, that benefits working people or low-income people, there is an uproar. Oh my God, you're helping young people. You're helping working people, you're helping poor people. What a terrible thing to do. But there is massive silence when you give gigantic tax breaks to the 1% or large corporations who are now doing phenomenally well. So if my colleague from Florida is interested in the transfer of wealth, let's work together and let's make sure that the working class of this country, not just the billionaires, get a fair shake. Let's help young people. Let's start canceling the student debt that we should have done years ago.
Mr. President.
The senator from Florida.
Well, first off, let me make sure my colleague from Vermont knows my background. I actually grew up in public housing, born to a single mom. I do care about people making sure you can get an education. That's why I did exactly what I did in Florida. I made sure people had the opportunity to get ahead. The 4 years before I became governor of Florida, the state lost 832,000 jobs. By cutting taxes, reducing regulations, and streamlining things, we added 1.7 million jobs so people all over my state could get a job. That's how people get ahead. You don't get ahead by just somebody transferring obligations from one person to somebody else. That doesn't improve, that improves a few people's lives, but that's completely unfair. That's not how this country was set up, that some people are going to pay for somebody else's obligation that they decide to pick up, and that's all I'm talking about.
The senator from Massachusetts.
I really do think about this transfer question, and I find myself asking, who paid for Jeff Bezos' yacht? Is it the taxpayers who said, now we, America's middle class, America's working class, is actually going to have to pick up the slack, and they'll be the ones who have to pay to keep the military. They're the ones who have to pay for roads and bridges. They're the ones who will pay for investment in science. But the billionaires can get richer and richer and richer and pay little or nothing in taxes. That is a giant transfer. And yet, none of our Republican colleagues seem interested in talking about that transfer and just putting a stop to the outflow from hardworking middle-class families over to the billionaires and the giant corporations. I
Mr.
yield.
President,
Senator from Florida.
I think who paid for Jeff Bezos' yacht is all the people that bought all those packages from Amazon. And by the way, if you do get one that says made in China, I hope everybody will send it back. I yield the floor.